So thank you very much for joining us. Just to set the scene, what we thought we'd do is break these discussions about Brexit into three broad groups. First, taking stock of where we are now, the next stage of the negotiations and preparations for no deal. And then we're going to move on to talk about some of the security and border issues. And then finally to look at trade and the economy. And then we're going to take a break from Brexit and talk about Huawei. Just starting with that, we're going to open with Hilary Benn.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. It's being reported that the government has cancelled the no-deal Brexit ferry contracts. Is that the case? And if so, how much is it going to cost?
Well, if I can come on to the ferry contracts, I wondered if it would be helpful before I did that, if I sort of set the scene as you're interested in where we are on negotiations and what we're doing. And
Prime Minister, because we have quite a lot of questions.
I'm sure it may be that my setting the scene will answer some of those questions.
Okay.
I think that's because I think if I update, obviously it's our policy to leave the EU in as orderly a fashion as soon as possible, and I regret the fact that it hasn't been possible. I've voted 3 times to do it, but obviously we haven't built a majority across the House. And obviously, as everybody knows, the House has also rejected no deal and other actions, including the people's vote, and by the legislation that was passed, compelled us to seek an extension. And as you know, I sought that extension until the 30th of June, but the Council, after lengthy deliberations, gave that extension until the 31st of October, but it's terminable. So we can leave at any point up until that time, and we will leave at the end of the month in which Parliament ratifies the withdrawal agreement. I think this is important because I want that to happen before the October deadline. And I think that once a consensus is reached, members should look to pass the necessary legislation and end the uncertainty as soon as is practically possible. We've been making concerted efforts to build on that consensus. Cross-party discussions on workers' rights, for example, making it clear we'd accept the amendment tabled by Gareth Snell and Lisa Nandy on the role of Parliament. And obviously we asked the House to ratify the withdrawal agreement itself, which the House chose not to do. But obviously then, following that, the Cabinet agreed that the right thing for us to do was to reach out to the opposition in order to decide how we can build a majority for the ratification of the withdrawal agreement and leaving. And I think that was unprecedented, but I'm convinced it was the right thing to do because public want to see us working together to deliver the result of the referendum. And we've been having constructive, meaningful talks which are continuing. There are differences on issues, but on many of the key areas, particularly on the withdrawal agreement, there's common ground. And we know that we need to end this uncertainty and do it as soon as possible. And I hope that the deal can be done. We certainly approach this with an open mind. But if we're not able to do that, then we'll bring votes to the House in order to determine what the House can support. And we stand ready to abide by that decision if the opposition are willing to do so. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be lots of technical questions, but I think the choice before the House remains the choice that has always been before the House in relation to this issue, which is we can form a majority to ratify and leave with a deal. We can decide to leave with no deal. We can go back to the people, admit failure and ask them to think again, or we could revoke Brexit. Those are the choices. I think the one that's the only acceptable is to form a majority to ratify the withdrawal agreement. Meanwhile, and I will continue to work and do everything I can to enable us to do that because I think that's what's right in the national interest. What we do, meanwhile, of course, is continue our preparations. Part of the issues around the preparations for no deal, which I've just been asked about in relation to the ferry contracts. Those ferry contracts, in the light of the extension that I've just referenced, we're reviewing the contingency planning that's taken place in relation to no deal. We've decided to terminate the contracts with Brittany Ferries and DFDS. Those contracts were a vital contingency measure, ensuring that critical goods like medicines could enter the UK in the event of disruption along the short straits in a no-deal scenario. But they both included early termination fees to ensure that we would not have to pay the full contract cost in the event that the capacity was no longer needed.
How much will it cost to cancel the contracts?
It will cost less than it would to carry on running the contracts.
Leo estimated it would be, I think, around 56 million quid. Could you confirm that figure?
I'd write to the committee with figures, but I think if we're talking about the question of costs, the point I've just made is an important one. which is that the combined termination costs with the operators is substantially lower than the national. It is actually lower than the NAO's recent estimate of termination costs, thanks to the decisions we took. But it's also lower than keeping those contracts on. I'm sure everybody would agree that we have to take the decision that is best in terms of the use of taxpayers' money.
I understand that entirely, but does that mean that the government has now accepted that there won't be a no-deal Brexit?